make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories,
Your freedom.
the Peter Schiff Show. The Peter Schiff Show.
Today's podcast is sponsored by NetSuite, the easy-to-use cloud-based business management software for every aspect of your business. Download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/gold. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/gold. netsuite.com/gold. Hey, before I get into today's podcast, I want to give a shout out to Dale Shagan. He is the guy that put together that intro that we played at the beginning of the podcast. And a lot of people have been commenting because we've had that intro up there for the last few podcasts, and they mentioned that they liked the new intro. That's not new. That's an old intro that we had in 2012 when I did the Peter Schiff radio show. That's where this whole thing got started. And so that was the intro to the radio show. Now, some of you who have been listening to me going all the way back, in fact, a lot of people go back to the Wall Street Unspun days, and I did that once a week. It was a shortwave radio show. I don't even know if people listen to shortwave anymore. Maybe they do. I don't know. But at the time, this show was on shortwave, and I did it once a week. It was, I think, on a Wednesday night at 8 or 9 o'clock. It was the midweek market update, I called it, Wall Street Unspun. And so that's where I started. And then I ended up doing the daily radio show. It was 2 hours a day, and I took calls, and I'd have a guest on for a half hour. So that was, every day I did that. And that was the intro. And the reason we brought it back is when I started doing these podcasts live with video on YouTube, there was always a little bit of time at the beginning where we started doing a countdown to try to get people time to tune in and listen live. So we had this countdown. And so instead of just having a countdown, we played the old intro to the radio show. And then we were editing it out. So if you listen live or watch live, you happen to see that. But if you listened a couple hours later, it was already taken out. Well, we stopped taking it out because a lot of people really liked it. So that's why it's there now. And we've left it in. I guess if people don't want it, you could just fast forward and skip through it. But I always loved the intro to the radio show. I thought it was very well done. That's why I mentioned Dale Shagan. He's the guy that put the whole thing together. You also notice I'm trying out an actual mic. I'd been using my lapel mic to do the podcasts, but I'm using a real mic because I think it sounds better. I know a lot of people have been commenting, hey, the sound could improve. So I think it's going to be better using this actual mic, which, now you're going to see the mic in front of me, but I think it sounds better. The video too would be a lot better. We have a 4K camera that we've been using for quite some time. It's just this Puerto Rican internet connection is not that great. I've been trying to upgrade for a long time to a fiber connection, and it's almost impossible here. I know they have it, and I've been trying for the last couple of years. So hopefully, eventually, I'll be able to improve the internet connection so that we get all the benefit of the quality of the camera. Anyway, let me get into the discussion. So I did last week's podcast, and if you haven't listened to the podcast I recorded on Friday, which was the day that we got the better than expected non-farm payroll report, jobs report, you should listen to it, because in that podcast I went over how completely bogus the jobs number was. But Wall Street, and I guess all the other streets where they invest, are completely buying into this BS. All the news that I've heard all week, ever since we got that jobs report, was this economy is much stronger than we thought. Hey, the Fed was worried about the jobs market and the labor market, but now it turns out they had nothing to worry about. Everything is great. We got this one jobs report where the unemployment rate fell and we created more jobs than we expected. And all of a sudden, there's nothing to worry about. Everything is fine. I don't know why we were concerned. I don't know why the Fed was concerned. Why did they cut interest rates by 50 basis points? Because they've only done that 2 other times in recent memory. One was during COVID, right, when they were just gone completely mad and slashed interest rates. And the other one was 2008 when we had the financial crisis. Every other rate cut that we've gotten from the Fed has been 25 basis points. So it's very rare that they do something more than 25. And again, they've only done more than 25 in panic mode. And so why were they in panic mode when they cut 50 basis points when we've got this fantastic economy with this super strong jobs market, as was just confirmed by the CPI? The jobs report. The jobs report, as I went over in detail, is completely meaningless. It doesn't matter. The fact that we added all these jobs for waiters and bartenders, it's not even believable anyway. I don't know. Of course, all they have to do is work 1 hour, right? And that's a job. But the economy is weak. People are not running out to eat in restaurants. People can't afford to eat at home, let alone eat out in a restaurant. It doesn't make any sense that there's all these new restaurants opening up. Right. So that it doesn't even pass the smell test that we've actually got all these jobs for waiters and bartenders. And again, I went into the fact that the government is the biggest employer. So the fact that the government itself is hiring a bunch of people, and that's why the number was greater than expected, that's not a sign of a strong economy. That's a sign of a weak economy that's about to get a lot weaker, because now we have the burden of all these non-productive government workers that we have to pay for. So there was nothing actually strong about the jobs report. So why is Wall Street paying so much attention to it? The dollar's kind of been rallying all week. The dollar index now, I think, is back above 103. Let me see where it ended up. We haven't finished up the week yet. We still have one more day. No, it's not. It's 102.9. So it's almost at 103, but the dollar's been strengthening. The euro is back down at 109. It got up to about 112 against the dollar. But a lot of it is now this talk about how strong the economy is. If you look at the expectations for rate cuts, you now have, I think it's maybe a 20% probability that the Fed won't cut at all in November. Nobody expects now another 50 basis point cut. It's either they're going to do 25 or they're going to do nothing. I'm in the 25 camp for November. But now you actually have people thinking that, hey, the economy is so strong that they may not even cut at all, especially since we got the FOMC minutes that came out on Wednesday. And they focused on the fact that some of the FOMC members didn't want to go 50 basis points. They only wanted to go 25 basis points. And so maybe we should go nothing in November to kind of get to where they wanted to be, because after all, we've got this really strong jobs number that they didn't know about, right? They were worried about the labor market, but now they've got nothing to worry about because we got this one report that says everything is great. But why does anybody care? These reports are meaningless, apart from the fact that even when you look beneath the surface, you realize that it's all superficial and that it's really a weak report. The numbers don't matter anyway. They are subject to massive revisions in the following month, even in the following year. They go back a year later and say, oh, we got it completely wrong. The numbers at best are just unreliable. For the Fed to say, hey, we're basing our monetary policy on these numbers, right? On these jobs numbers or these inflation numbers that the government creates. That's what we're going to base our policy on. It makes no sense because at best, they're unreliable numbers. But, if you take a more sinister view, and I do, they are highly politicized. The government, grades its own report card. It doesn't want to give itself an F, especially when you're a month away from an election. So there is a lot of political pressure to make these numbers look good, especially the inflation number and the unemployment number. Those are the two big numbers that the media looks at and that the voters are going to be seeing because that's the way the media is going to be presenting things. So there's a lot of pressure on the inflation rate and the unemployment rate. That's why they have rigged it over the years. They keep redefining what inflation is, although they already redefined inflation from expanding money supply to rising prices. That's already a bastardization of the word, right? It's an Orwellian, double speak to pretend inflation is rising prices. But they've already pulled that off. But now that they've got the public to accept the false definition of inflation as rising prices, they keep changing the index that measures those prices. And this is deliberate. It's not an accident that the CPI understates how much prices are rising because that's what the government wanted. In fact, when they put together that Boskin Commission in the early 1990s, they claimed that the CPI overstated inflation, which was not true. It probably still understated it even then. But they said, the CPI is overstating inflation and we're going to fix it, which is what they did. The fix is in. Now it massively understates inflation. But that was the purpose of the redesigned CPI. It was to make the CPI number smaller than it otherwise would have been. And we got the CPI, and I'm going to get to that a little bit later in the podcast. We got the September CPI today, right? And so I'm going to talk about that. But it's another one of those numbers that means nothing because it has been so rigged over the years to produce a low number specifically because it makes the politicians look good. That's the same thing with the unemployment rate. They've changed that so many times over the years. They determine what it means to be unemployed. I mean, most people think, oh, you're unemployed if you're looking for work, right? And but the government has its own definition of what it means to be unemployed, and that's changed over the years. See, right now, as long as you do any work, no matter how trivial, you're not unemployed. So take those waiter and bartender jobs. If I decided to work a Friday night, I work for a few hours tending bar, but I spent the entire week looking for a job. I was actually pounding the table, handing out resumes to the extent that people still do that in the internet age. But I was really looking hard for a job. But, I decided to tend bar for a few hours to earn some bucks, right? According to the government, I'm not unemployed. Well, that guy used to be considered unemployed just because he earns a few bucks while he's looking for a job. He's unemployed, right? If I'm an engineer and I'm tending bar in my spare time, but I am looking for a job as an engineer, I'm an unemployed engineer because I worked for a few hours as a bartender. That doesn't mean now I'm employed, but according to the government, I am, right? That wasn't how it was in the 60s and the 70s or the 80s, right? That guy would have been considered unemployed. But especially today with the gig economy, anybody can just drive an Uber, right, in their spare time. So if I'm this unemployed engineer and I decide to sign up as an Uber driver, and I may not, work full time. When you drive an Uber, you decide when you want to work, right? Maybe you only drive your Uber one day a week. Maybe you wait for certain times when there's some surge pricing and you're like, oh, whoa, hey, there's some really high I'll go drive. I'll pick up some extra cash, right? The minute you do that, the minute you sign up, no, you're not unemployed anymore, right? You drive for Uber. So there's so many ways now for the unemployed people to earn a little bit of money while they're looking for a real job. And so they don't count. So the whole unemployment number is completely meaningless. You can't even point to it. It tells you nothing about the true state of the labor market. Yet apparently this is what the Fed bases everything on. How can it even matter? If the Fed is setting monetary policy, what difference does a set of numbers makes? Like, why should this jobs report, when you know how completely unreliable it is and how it can be revised, how do you make any decisions based on that? And the same thing with the CPI. We'll talk about the CPI on the other end of the break. So stick around. We'll be right back.
As a business owner, I know the challenge of navigating unpredictable markets, interest rates, and inflation. That's why having the right tools is essential. NetSuite streamlines operations and scales with growth. Over 38,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control needed to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. When you're closing the books in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. NetSuite is the platform that I would choose, and you should too. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/gold. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/gold. netsuite.com/gold.
All right, before I get into the CPI, we did get some more jobs numbers today. We got the weekly unemployment numbers. And the reason I guess they're significant is because there was a big spike in the weekly jobless claims this week to 258,000. They were looking for 226,000. And that would have been just 1,000 more than the 225,000 that we got in the prior week. So that's 33,000 spike. That's a big number. You have to go back, I think, about a year, 13 months to find another 258,000 initial claims. And then you got to go back 3 years to find another one that was bigger. So really, it's the most we've got in a week in 3 years. Now, I don't know if it's related to one of the hurricanes we just had. I mean, I read something about that, but still, we'll see. It is a big jump. And maybe, people are thinking, oh, this is great. We don't have to worry about the labor market at all. Okay, well, now you get a really bad number, and you can, kind of make some excuses to try to say it's a one-off event. We'll see. But the CPI came out today for September. We're going to get the PPI tomorrow. But the CPI came out this morning. And the Biden administration is celebrating this number because the year-over-year number, the headline, was 2.4%. And that was below the 2.5% from the prior month. And now we're closer to 2% than 3% now. We've gone through the halfway mark. But this is the lowest it's been in several years. And so they're saying this is great. We're headed down to 2%. We've got, we're almost there, right? We're below 2.5. But the bad news is that the month-over-month number was actually double what they were expecting. They were expecting a 0.1% rise, and there was a 0.2% rise in the headline number. And more significantly, the core, which excludes food and energy, was supposed to rise by 0.2, and it rose by 0.3. And the year-over-year core, which was expected to rise by 3.2%, it rose by 3.3%. And that was actually a tick hotter than the year over year 3.2% from August. So the core inflation was above estimates and higher than the previous month. And the core, as far as the Fed has always been concerned, that's more important than the headline number. Because, when the headline number was going up and they would say, well, look at the core, right? The core is more important because it strips out the volatile food and energy. Well, the reason the headline number is so low is because we had a collapse in oil prices that is not going to last. In fact, oil prices are headed back up. In fact, they would be a lot higher if we didn't have a big drop earlier in the week, but we are just below $75 a barrel on oil. So we're trending back up. We got as low as $65 a barrel a couple of weeks ago. So I think oil is headed back higher. And so, this is the bottom of the headline CPI being, near 2. Maybe 2.4 will end up being as low as we go. But the core never got anywhere near 2. I mean, we're still above 3 at 3.3. Why isn't that a bigger problem for the Fed? Because if the Fed wants the core at 2%, right? Because it always says that's what it wants. It wants core inflation at 2%, not just headline. Core inflation is supposed to be at 2%. And it's not nowhere close. So why are they going to cut rates at all with core inflation at 3.3 and trending higher? And especially if you look at some of the components of inflation that are probably a more honest measure. I was looking on Zero Hedge, pointed out that auto insurance is up 56% under Biden. And it just spiked up. And in fact, consumer prices are now at a new high, right? So they're the highest they've been. They keep going up. Remember, they don't go down. So if you thought consumer prices were too high last year, they're even higher now, right? There is no relief. There is no good news. Prices are not coming down. They're just going up a little more slowly than they were before. But that's only temporary until they go up faster than they were before. But auto prices, right, up 56% in 3.5 years. What kind of inflation rate is that? Now, that to me is probably a more honest, assuming that, that's the real number, because who knows, maybe they're up more. But why are insurance rates up so much? Are we just driving a lot more recklessly now than we used to? Now, I read some people are thinking, because it's a bunch of illegals that are driving around that don't have any insurance. And I mean, that's possible that's the case. But I don't think that's the real explanation. I mean, that might be a small part of the 56% increase in, people who get into accidents and who don't have any insurance, right? Uninsured motorists. I think the real reason that insurance premiums for automobiles are up so much, it's the same reason that your homeowner's insurance has gone up dramatically. And that's because when you get in an accident, the insurance company has to fix your car. And the cost of fixing your car has gone way up because the price of all the materials and the labor to repair your car have gone way up. Everything is more expensive. And so the insurance companies have to raise premiums in order to cover those higher expenses. And so insurance rates are a pretty good measure of prices and what's happening with prices, because that's why these insurance rates are going up so much, is prices. Now, of course, other reason for your homeowners, you have all these natural disasters. We got another one that just went through Florida, another hurricane, Milton, that just went through. And again, this is going to cause a lot of damage. In fact, I want to talk a little bit more about the moral hazard, or not the moral hazard, that the broken window fallacy, because every time there's a natural disaster, you start to hear this nonsense. So I do want to debunk it, and I will, but I want to just finish making the point. I kind of digressed into that topic, and I'd rather, finish talking about inflation. But this big move up in insurance costs, that is really more descriptive or revealing about inflation than the CPI, right? Because the CPI is highly rigged and manipulated, and insurance rates are insurance rates. I mean, and it's a competitive market. I mean, insurance companies don't have monopolies, right? I mean, you have plenty of companies writing auto policies. So if one company tries to overcharge you, you can switch to another company, right? And so the fact that everybody is raising their rates, it's because it costs a lot more when people put in their claims. And that's the same thing for homeowners. Your house burns down, it's going to cost a lot more money to rebuild it. Or if anything goes wrong, it's going to cost a lot more money. You know, I've been noticing that Elon Musk has been posting a lot of Milton Friedman, not to be confused with the hurricane, but the economist, Milton Friedman. He's been posting a lot of clips of Milton Friedman talking about inflation. And I these are great clips. And I love the fact that Elon Musk is posting them because he's got, 200 million followers or whatever on X. So that's a lot of people who probably never even heard of Milton Friedman, had no exposure to Milton Friedman. And he's a great explainer of economic principles and inflation in particular. And he correctly points out that inflation only has one cause, that all the inflation is made in Washington, D.C. by the government. And he talks about how the government tries to blame it, right, on greedy companies. And he says it's not greedy companies. He says businessmen are greedy. That's just the way people are. They're no different than anybody else. We're all greedy. And greed doesn't cause inflation. I've pointed out that greed actually brings prices down. If I'm a greedy entrepreneur, how do I make more money? I lower the prices of my products. I sell more stuff. If I want to crush my competitors, I have to do it by lowering my prices, not raising my prices. So if I want to maximize the money that I earn because I'm a greedy, son of a gun, I got to lower my prices. That's how I get really rich. You don't get rich by gouging your customers, because then you lose your customers, right? They go someplace else and you end up getting gouged. So Milton Friedman debunks this years and years ago, right? This is not new. This is from maybe in the 1970s, right? We had an experience with inflation back then. And Milton Friedman is saying, don't blame it on greedy corporations. Don't blame it on the labor unions. Don't blame it on the Arab sheiks, right? Don't blame it on Putin. Don't blame it on Saudi Arabia. He says it's the government that causes all the inflation. And more importantly, in these clips, he points out that the real rate of taxation is not the income tax or the payroll tax or tariffs, right? The real tax burden is what the government spends, not what it collects, what it spends. That's what I've been saying. Look at federal spending. Every dime that the federal government spends is a tax. And hopefully, Donald Trump, who's now, best buds with Elon Musk, is following his posts to realize that all of the tax cuts that he is promising are a lie if he does not cut government spending by the same amount. Because if Trump is going to continue government spending, then he's going to continue the tax burden. He is not going to lessen that burden. He is just going to change the way that burden is distributed among the public. And that is not what the public wants. In fact, I mentioned on the podcast already that Donald Trump has promised to not tax tips, not tax overtime, not tax Social Security benefits. But now he's also promising to lower taxes on expats, Americans living abroad. I'm an American sort of living abroad. I'm in Puerto Rico. But one of the reasons that I'm in Puerto Rico and not some other, tax haven is because the tax havens around the world don't apply to Americans, because America is unique in that we tax you based on citizenship, not based on residency. So if you're a German and you move to Dubai, Germany doesn't tax you on your income that you earn in Dubai. But if you're an American and you move to Dubai, you're still filing 1040s. You're still paying taxes. See, the U.S. doesn't care where you live. They're going to tax you wherever you are. Now, a lot of people don't know, and I've mentioned this once before on a podcast, but I might as well mention it again because it's an important tidbit of information. Where that originated. Why is it that America is so unique in that we tax you on your worldwide income wherever you happen to live while you're earning it? See, that's why a lot of Americans end up renouncing their citizenship to get out from under the IRS. But if you're a German or you're an Australian or, anywhere, you don't have to renounce your citizenship. You just move. You can keep your citizenship. You just don't live in the country. And then, you're not responsible for the taxes. You're responsible for the taxes where you live. And, if you happen to live in a place that has low taxes, then you don't have much of a responsibility. But here's where it came from. So the very first income tax that America imposed was during the Civil War. And the North imposed it. And they got rid of it when the war was over, thankfully. But they had an income tax during the war. Probably was unconstitutional. In fact, it was unconstitutional. But, the Constitution kind of goes out the window during a war. And so they created the income tax to pay for the war. Now, another thing that they did during the Civil War, they had a draft. That was the first draft that we had. And that's when the tradition of dodging the draft by moving to Canada began. So people that didn't want to be drafted moved up to Canada to avoid the draft. Now, when they imposed the income tax, they knew that there were a lot of draft dodgers up in Canada that weren't fighting. Well, they wanted to make sure that at least they paid taxes. So the intent of subjecting everybody to the income tax, no matter where they lived, was to go after the draft dodgers. So it was like, hey, you may be dodging military service, but we still want income tax from you. That was kind of how it started. So when they resurrected the income tax, in 1913, they kept that provision from wartime tax. That's why it's here. It's stuck. And we're still living with it, right? Which is, another reason that was such a bad war. Not that the outcome was bad in that slavery ended. I would have preferred to have slavery end without a civil war. But the government always does bad things during wartime. In fact, paper money never existed in America until the Civil War. That's where they started the greenback. They issued the greenback during the Civil War. It was backed by gold, but it was the first time the U.S. government issued paper money. And when the war was over, they stopped it, right? So they issued it during the war. And that's what the precedent was. Because if you try to challenge the constitutionality of, let's say the Federal Reserve, they always go back to these legal tender cases that were all about the paper money that was issued during the Civil War. And they say, well, because the Supreme Court said it was constitutional. And so they go back and say, well, if it was constitutional to issue greenbacks during the Civil War, it's constitutional now. But no, it's not. Because if you actually read the decisions, they only said it was constitutional because it was an emergency. And they said, well, if the government can do all kinds of things in an emergency, if they can confiscate property in an emergency during a war, well, they can give you a piece of paper, instead of confiscating your property. And of course, the notes that they said were constitutional were issued by the U.S. government and were redeemable in actual gold. What does that have to do with notes issued by the Federal Reserve that are redeemable in nothing, right? They're not even the same. But also, if you look at the government's argument, when the government argued before the Supreme Court that the greenbacks were constitutional, they didn't even argue the monetary provisions, right? They didn't go to Article 1, Section 8 that says the U.S. government can coin money and regulate its value. They didn't even cite that section. They went to other sections of the Constitution that had to do with, necessary, proper to preserve the Union. It was an emergency, and we were doing this because they knew they didn't have the monetary authority. Everybody knew back then that the U.S. government was not authorized in the Constitution to print money. So they had to defend it based on the emergency of a civil war. And under those extreme circumstances, the government could issue these notes and they were backed by gold, right? And there's a number of these cases, but that's got nothing to do with the irredeemable notes of a private banking syndicate that are circulating around today. Totally unconstitutional, but I really digress, and I don't want to make that the topic. But the point was that the Civil War, we got a lot of bad things out of the Civil War. One of them is that provision on taxing Americans no matter where they live. And Donald Trump, for the first time, I haven't heard any other presidential candidates talking about this. He's promising to do something about it. Now, I don't know if he's going to eliminate it completely so that Americans are going to be just like anybody else and they're free to live wherever they want without having to renounce their citizenship, without having to pay that onerous exit tax. Or I don't know if he's just going to try to tweak it so that the burden isn't as heavy on you. I don't know. He didn't really give out much detail, but obviously this is another attempt to win votes because unlike expats, living in Puerto Rico, if you live in another country, if you live in Europe or you live somewhere in Asia or South America, right? Not Puerto Rico, you live in one of those countries, you can still vote. You can vote absentee ballot. You can vote for president. So this is another reason for people to vote for Trump because Trump is promising to cut taxes. He's promising tax cuts for so many people, but he's not identifying the government spending. He's taken Medicare, Social Security, national defense, off the table. So when you get rid of all the big things, plus interest on the national debt, which is now one of the biggest, there's not much left. Even if you eliminate all of it, it's not going to cover the tax cuts, right? That we've promised. But my point was that Donald Trump hopefully will pay attention to what Elon Musk is posting about Milton Friedman. And regardless of what he says to become president, that when he is president, the next time he will, take a different approach and actually say, you know what, we need to cut these programs. I took another look at it. I had a meeting with people, and as much as I hate to do it, we got to cut Social Security. We got to cut Medicare. We got to cut defense. There's a lot of things that he needs to cut. I also would love to see him eliminate a lot of agencies and departments, and he could probably start with the Space Force. That would be a good gesture because he created the Space Force. And so he can't really start eliminating agencies and departments and leave the Space Force there. So kind of like, take one for the team and say, you know what, as much as I like outer space and I thought it was pretty cool to have a Space Force, we're broke. We can't afford it. I'll let Elon Musk handle going to space, right? Let's leave that to the private sector. The government doesn't need a Space Force. And that would be a good gesture to now get rid of the Department of Energy and the Department of Education and all these other departments that have to be eliminated, right? If he can at least start with one of his own creations, it shows that he's serious about reducing government. Because according to what Milton Friedman is saying, inflation is not going to go away until you cut government spending. And that's why, and I start off talking about the podcast about these government numbers. The numbers the government puts out are irrelevant to the Fed. What the Fed should be looking at is the massive growth in money supply, and it's got its fingers all over that money, the explosion of debt in this country, the complete lack of any responsibility on either side of the political aisle to do anything about it. So you have this massive amount of debt, this ticking time bomb, and money supply. Those are the only numbers that you need. Maybe look at our trade deficits, our current account deficits, and that tells you that interest rates are too low and inflation is going to be too high. Look at the record high debt that households are shouldering. I just read again, credit card interest rates just hit another all-time record high. Even though the Fed cut rates, the rates that Americans are paying on their credit cards to buy food is at a new all-time record high. And their balances, are at an all-time record high. How is it even possible that people could believe these government numbers about how good the economy is when consumers are in such bad shape? It defies logic that people would be working 2 or 3 jobs and have maxed out their credit cards, be mired in more debt than they've ever been, despite working more jobs than they ever had, and say, oh, we've got a great economy. I mean, if this is a great economy, imagine what a lousy economy is going to be. No, a great economy is where I only have one job because that's all I need. And I have a lot of leisure because I make a lot of money at my job. In a great economy, I don't have a lot of debt because I actually earn money and I can afford the things that I buy. I don't have to go into debt to eat. I got plenty of income to eat. In fact, I'm saving. I'm saving for my retirement, right? That's a strong economy, right? What we got now is a weak economy regardless. And the stock market keeps hitting record high after record high, although we took a little break today. We didn't close at a record. We were down a bit. But we keep making record highs on the idea that, hey, not only isn't there going to be a soft landing, there's no landing. We've got this great economy, and it's all based on these BS government reports, which are all going to be revised down. Wait till after the election. You know, the mood is going to change. I said not too long ago, investors were pricing out a soft landing. Now they're pricing it back in, or no landing at all. You know, it's not going to take more than a couple of bad reports, which we're going to get. And the psychology is going to turn. Meanwhile, you know, you got a break if you're looking to buy some foreign stocks because the dollar came down a bit. You know, gold, which corrected, it held 2,600. You know, right now, gold today closed at 2,630. And it never got below 2,600 in its recent correction. And I think, again, that's probably support now. I mean, support keeps getting higher and higher and higher as we're moving up. Now, we haven't got above 2,700 yet, but we will. I mean, maybe by next week. In fact, we finally saw some life in the gold stocks today. You know, well, I actually posted this morning. Gold was only 2% off its record high this morning. And gold stocks were more than 7% below where they were 2 weeks ago. Well, they got back about half of that today because the GDX was up 2.7% or 2.8%, and the GDXJ was up 3.7%. They closed at the high of the day. So we finally saw a good move on gold that was much bigger, or the gold mining stocks rather, that was much bigger than gold. Gold was up about 0.7%. And we got today a lot of extra leverage in the miners. And so maybe now we're going to start to see some money coming in. People realize how cheap these stocks are. Even if the price of gold falls, and it falls substantially, they're still cheap. Now, also, it may not be a coincidence that, you know, the Bitcoin ETFs were down 2% today. Bitcoin was down. In fact, it traded at a new multi-week low. I think the low intraday, we got below 59,000. We were 58,000 and change. As I'm speaking, it's clawed its way back. Bitcoin is right below 60,000. It's 59,950 on a Thursday afternoon. But I think what might have been happening today is some of that spec money that was riding in these Bitcoin ETFs may have moved over into the gold mining stocks. That might be why gold mining stocks had such a big update today, even though the price of gold was not up that much today. It may be that finally some of these speculative investors, because the people who invest in gold mining stocks, they're very different than the investors in physical gold, right? The physical gold buyers, I think, are a lot smarter, right? They're buying gold for a reason. There are a lot of sophisticated international players, central bankers who are buying gold. It's just, you know, investors who are buying the mining stocks, right? The central banks don't buy gold mining stocks. the big money that's looking to preserve its wealth isn't gambling into gold mining stocks, right? People who are buying gold mining stocks are the same fools who are, buying 30-year treasuries at 4%, right? They have no clue. And there's a lot of crazy stocks that people buy that are way overpriced that, determine what these gold stocks are going to do. So it's a very different group of people who are involved. But maybe these investors are finally starting to wake up that, hey, if I'm going to speculate, these gold mining stocks are a much better way to do it than Bitcoin ETFs, or maybe, some of the AI stocks. Maybe that trade has really played out now. Where could the speculative money flow? Because gold mining stocks are clearly speculative, right? I mean, they're not for the faint of heart. These are not conservative investments. So there's spec money. And so, there's a certain amount of money that's willing to take risk, and it's, can only go in so many places. And so if it's going in one place, it can't go someplace else. So I think what might be happening is the speculators are now waking up to the action or potential action in the gold mining sector, and they're moving some of their chips. And they got a lot of chips in these Bitcoin ETFs. And, as they start to move them, again, that's going to be very bad for Bitcoin. I wanted to talk a little bit, though, about the hurricane. I mentioned this earlier. And again, use this to talk about the broken window fallacy. You always get people talking about, the silver lining to every cloud. Like, oh, this is going to help the economy because we have a hurricane, because, we got to fix everything that broke, right? We got to, that's going to help the GDP. And this is all nonsense. This is why guys like Paul Krugman said we should help the economy by preparing for a fake alien invasion. I mean, I'm not making this up. He actually proposed this years ago as an economic stimulus. The government should pretend that aliens are going to invade the earth so that we can spend a lot of money preparing to defend ourselves from this, fake invasion. Because as far as Paul Krugman is concerned, just, as long as we spend money, that's great. Doesn't matter what we're spending it on, right? As long as we spend, that's a great economy. Now, that's why this guy's got a Nobel Prize, right? Because, he's basically flunked Econ 101, and so they gave him a Nobel Prize. You're never better off because you have to rebuild something that was destroyed, or because you waste your money. Like the Keynesian will say, look, as long as we spend the money, right, it's good for the economy. Well, like what if you build a garage that has no doors, right? Well, what good is that? You can't get your car in. It's a complete waste, right? It's like digging a hole, and then you pay people to dig a hole, and then you pay somebody else to fill it back up again. So at the end of the day, you're right back where you started, right? But you've spent a lot of money. A lot of people have worked, but you've got nothing to show for it. The Keynesian thinks, well, as long as people are out there digging holes and filling them back up again, that's good because they've got jobs. No, that's a waste because they've wasted their labor producing nothing. But the classic example of this is the broken window fallacy, which is about a broken window. And this is Henry Hazlitt, Economics in One Lesson, which is a great book. But he talks about somebody throws a brick through a window, right? And now the window is broken. And so the guy that owns the house, he's got to fix the window. And so he's got to call up a window repair guy. And, maybe it's $200. I don't know. I'm just picking a number out of a hat. So he pays $200 and he gets his window fixed. Well, the Keynesian economist says, well, that was great. The kid that threw that brick, he stimulated the economy because now the window repair guy just got a job and he made $200. And so we're better off because this guy got work, right? And you may think that's ridiculous, but this is actually what these fools believe. But what Henry Hazlitt points out is, yes, you can see that the window repairman benefited, right? That is an example of what is seen. And politicians always care about what is seen, right? Because they can take credit for that. Hey, look, this window washer got a job. The window washer knows he's got the job. He might vote for the government. Maybe it was a politician that threw the brick through the window. And now he can say, hey, look, I got you this job. Oh, thank you. You got my vote, right? Politicians always care about what can be seen. right? Because they can take credit for that. But they're never held responsible for what can't be seen because it can't be seen. So the point Hazlitt makes is, okay, the guy that owns the house who had to spend $200 to fix his window, what would he have done with that $200 if he didn't have to spend it replacing a window? Well, maybe he was going to buy himself a new pair of shoes. He had his eye on these pair of shoes and he had saved up $200 to buy these shoes, but now he has to forego the shoes. He can't buy them because he has to use the $200 to replace the window that broke. And so now the guy that has the shoe business, the shoemaker, he's out $200, right? But nobody can see that. You don't know that this guy was going to go and buy a pair of shoes. That is the unseen. That is the lost job, the lost opportunity that we don't see. All we see is the window repair guy getting a job. But if you take a look at it from the perspective of the homeowner, what happened to him? He's out a pair of shoes. He spent his $200, but he doesn't have shoes. He just have the same window he had before it was broke. So the actual guy is worse off by a pair of shoes. And that's always what happens. You know, if we have to spend money to rebuild houses that were destroyed by a hurricane, the fact that we're spending money to replace what we already had isn't good. And what could we have done with those resources if we didn't have to replace houses that we already had? It is always a net loss. And by the way, too, all these hurricanes, right? This is all going to be inflationary because where's the money going to come from? The government, FEMA. You know, everybody is upset that FEMA isn't spending more money on these natural disasters. We shouldn't even have a FEMA. There is nothing in the Constitution that authorizes the U.S. government to step in where there's a disaster, whether it's a hurricane or an earthquake or a fire or a flood, and do damage control or damage repair. That's not what the federal government is supposed to do. We got state governments. We got local governments. That's what they're there to do. Why do we have Washington, D.C. dealing with problems in California, in Florida, in Alaska, right? In Texas? Washington, D.C. is nowhere near those areas. We have states for a reason. You know, it's a federal government. We have state governments. We don't just have one massive government, central government. This is what the states are supposed to do, right? They got taxes, right? I mean, and people are supposed to take care of themselves. People are supposed to provide, save for a rainy day, buy insurance, right? This is none of the government's business. You know, go back to the last good Democratic president, Grover Cleveland, and Donald Trump is trying to do what Grover Cleveland was the only president to ever do, which is serve 2 non-consecutive terms. But Grover Cleveland was the last great Democratic president. And when there was a drought in Texas and Congress appropriated like $10,000, right, to help the drought-stricken farmers, he vetoed the bill. In fact, I read what he said on one of my other podcasts. I didn't prepare it for this time, but he said that I could lay my finger on no section of the Constitution that authorizes this spending. And so he vetoed it. And he said, look, I feel badly for the farmers and I want to help them. But as president, I can't use taxpayer money to help them. And so you know what he did? He donated his own money to the farmers, and the whole country donated money to the farmers, and they got a lot more money than the $10,000 they were trying to appropriate. But the point is that Grover Cleveland had integrity. He knew it's great to get votes, right? Oh, yeah, it shows how much you care, right? I really care about the people. Everybody's talking about, oh, the victims of the hurricane. Yeah, I feel for the victims of the hurricane, but it's not up to the federal government to take care of them. And in fact, because now everybody expects the federal government's going to take care of every emergency, nobody is prepared. It would be a lot more efficient if we allowed the local governments to pay for their own disasters and prepare for them. But because we've created this huge moral hazard, that's the real disaster. It's the moral hazard created by FEMA. Now, natural disasters collectively cost a lot more money because we've outsourced everything to the federal government. And, we have the federal government subsidizing people to build in flood zones. And so a lot more people end up living in flood zones. And so when there is a flood, it's a much bigger loss because the government subsidized it with insurance and all the bailouts. So I would like to see Trump, of course he won't do it, come out and say, look, this is all wrong. This is not the way the republic is supposed to operate with the federal government involved in so many things. So that's one of the things that we need to get rid of. And then we won't have to complain about it. We'll have better relief if the states know, okay, if something goes wrong, I can't expect a handout from the federal government. So let me figure out, how to prepare for this, how to take care of it ourselves. Because, there's so much corruption going on at FEMA. It's so far removed from where these accidents are. And by the way, FEMA's budget isn't even included in the official budget. So when they talk about what the budget is and how much they project the deficit is going to be, they don't even count anything for FEMA because they say, well, that's off budget because it's an emergency. Yeah, but we get emergencies every year. They should be required in the budget to set aside money. They can look back over the last 5 or 10 years and know how much they spend every year. It's not like we have any year that goes by without a disaster. We have them every year. It's recurring. They're not extraordinary events when they happen every single year. So the government, and if it was a private corporation, they would have to do this. They have to budget and account for an expense that they know that's going to happen. But it's all off budget. That's one of the reasons that the national debt rises by so much more than the official deficits, because the official deficits, like everything else the government puts out, are a lie. Just like the CPI, just like the unemployment rate, they can't tell the truth about anything. And that's why nothing that they say should be believed. Anyway, I want to finish off today's podcast by mentioning again my wife's new band, Laughing Cats. And I mentioned on the podcast that she posted her video on her YouTube channel. And she's got the song on Spotify. I think it's a really good song, and it's going to be followed up by some even better songs, right? She's got a really good album that she's created where she wrote all the songs herself, sings them, and she had a professional musician, Tony Frednelli, who was, with Third Eye Blind for more than 10 years as their guitar player, but he's also a very talented songwriter. He wrote the music, and my wife, wrote all the lyrics. But they have a lot of streams now on Spotify. I think like 25,000 streams. So they're starting to climb there. And I would encourage everybody, too, to go to Spotify and listen to it. But she only has 7,600 views on her YouTube video. And I would have thought that, some of the people that listen to my podcast would have checked it out. Because I know I usually get, 670 to 100,000, sometimes more than 100,000 people who listen to my podcast on YouTube. Right. I know I have people that listen on other platforms, but I know, YouTube, because you see it right on the YouTube. And, just a small percentage of the people who listen to my podcast on YouTube went and listened to her song. And I really want to help, get that song some traction. And it's a good song. If the song wasn't any good, believe me, I wouldn't tell anybody to listen to it. It's actually a very good song. I think she did a great job on it. Not just this song, but all the other songs that are coming out. So I want everybody, as just a favor to me, but you'll enjoy it. After you listen to today's podcast, just go click on the link. We're putting it in the description for the GYB official music video. Just watch it. It's not even 3 minutes. And I'm sure, after you get into the first 30 seconds, you'll like it and you're going to listen to the whole song. Plus, this one is actually a video. We shot the whole video at my house in Puerto Rico. But so just check it out. The clip is there. I don't know if, how it helps, but I think if we get more people that have seen the video, then YouTube might do something with it. And I'm sure that if my audience listens to it and you like the song, even if you disagree with my politics or disagree with my economics, disagree with me on Bitcoin, I think a lot of people will agree that this is a good song. It's catchy. And so you might as well listen to it, and then you can share it with your friends. Anyway, that's it for now. Don't forget, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. And again, to all my Jewish listeners, we have the Yom Kippur holiday coming up. That's the main reason I didn't do this podcast on Friday, and I wasn't able to wait for the PPI, which I might have normally done because we have the holiday coming up over the weekend. But I'll be back again next week with more podcasts. Bye for now.